Well, it's making this video on April the 9th, and I thought we'd focus today on events from yesterday, the announcement of President Biden's gun control agenda, and an announcement of David Chapman as his nominee for the to head up the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. But this was kind of expected that he was going to come out with some executive orders on gun control. And basically what we're looking at right now, he's going after the pistol braces for the AR pistols with an executive order similar to the Trump bump stock executive order. And he's also, apparently pushing some kind of an issue against what they refer to as ghost guns. In other words, guns that are assembled from kits of parts and they require a degree of machining to complete the actual firearm part of the gun. A perfect example of this sort of thing is the idea of an incomplete lower for an AR-15, which is not yet completed to the level it would have a serial number on under current regulations, which would then require some machining and stuff to be done in order to finish it up, and then the other parts can be bought and assembled. That's essentially the kind of thing they're talking about. Although there probably are other examples, including, well, parts that are made by 3D printing, I think is another thing that's out there as well. It's kind of a maybe an underground part of the firearms community, or whatever you want to look at it. It's out there. And so that is proposing a model for red flag laws that they're going to try to encourage states to pass, and of course appointing this David Chapman to head the ATF, who seems to be a very radical anti-gun person. So I guess it'll increase the competition for raising funds for both the NRA, Gun Owners America on the one side, and also for the anti-gun groups on the other side. I believe David Chapman was associated with the Giffords effort, if you remember all that. So anyhow, that's kind of what it is. There's a lot of implications here, and I want to kind of get into some of this stuff. By the way, if you like these videos, remember to subscribe. Give me a like. It helps out with the algorithm. And any comments you have, I appreciate. We'll see if we get some discussion going, maybe. Okay. Of course, the pistol brace thing, essentially, if I understand, they're going to try to recategorize them as effectively an SBR if you have a pistol brace. And then it would have to be registered under the National Firearms Act, which is this thing was passed during the Roosevelt administration, in which you have to have a background check and I think pay a $200 tax and so forth, to own the thing. This is rather arbitrary because previously, of course, these things were bought without this, and they're sort of changing the rules in the middle of the game. Similar to the thing that was done on the bump stocks. Now, I personally am not a big fan of either AR pistols or bump stocks because, well, I see them both as ways to get around established gun control laws, which haven't yet been repealed, and they're invitations for people like Joe Biden to do exactly what he's doing. And in fact, I kind of foresaw that would happen some years back in conversations with people I know. I said, this is a gun control law waiting to happen, really, because, and of course, finally somebody used one of the pistols in a mass shooting out in Colorado, which I think, as far as I know, is the first time one of those have ever been used. I'm sure they're advocates of them. I believe they've gained popularity basically because of the kind of firearms that are being used by elite special forces units, such as the Navy SEALs and Delta Force and so forth. And I mean, for instance, the Navy SEALs have one of their favorite weapons is the H&K 416 with a 10.5-inch barrel and a big suppressor on it. And it's used basically when they're going into buildings and going after terrorists and stuff like that. It's not really for long-range combat, but it gives them more capability than a pistol-calibered submachine gun if they do find themselves caught in a situation like the SEALs and Grenada got or something like that. So it has they have their merits, but I mean, it's sort of a kind of a cool type factor, and so people have wanted those, but they didn't want to have to go through the the process of class 3 and all the rigmarole that's required for that. And so that was a workaround, and now, of course, they're coming after them. But the bad thing about this, in my opinion, as with a bump stock, is it starts setting a precedent where something that's commonly or widely owned and totally legal and sold with the approval of the government previously is now being recategorized, and then people are put into positions of either giving them up or facing or going through a process of paying a tax and all the paperwork, or becoming a criminal. Okay? And I think that's just completely unfair. If the government had said from the outset that these things violated the rules and won't be allowed to be sold, we'd be in one totally different position. And then people would either have to go to Congress to get the law changed or accept that fact. But no, the government allowed it to happen, lured everybody in, and then says, no, we changed our mind. And remember, I think that these things came into being not under the Trump administration at all. A lot of these things were allowed back during Obama and even in Bush the second. So this is, really a negative, really bad policies, I think, to do that. And so, in my own opinion, for one thing, I think that if you were going to move them to this category, that it's certainly at least all the fees involved should be waived, and it should be done at the government expense, because they're the ones that set this thing up in the first place. Now, and the other thing, I'm very, very skeptical of red flag laws. And these are, it sounds good in general, except we know what's going to actually happen with these. It's going to be things like somebody gets in an argument with their neighbor, a breakup of a couple, or a divorce, or somebody that just comes across as somebody who's a little bit odd or something, whatever. And next thing you know, there's going to be somebody filing a complaint, and the other thing will be somebody that had a run-in with the police that came out a little bit unfavorable. And next thing you know, somebody will file a complaint, unbeknownst to them, some judge will issue an order, and then at 5 o'clock in the morning, a SWAT team shows up at their house. And then if they get through all that okay, and somebody doesn't kill their dog, or them, then you're going to have a situation where the person's going to have to go at significant personal expense to go to court to get this thing turned around, if they can. Now, if they really are some kind of mental case, I guess it's a good thing that they didn't have a gun, one might say. But I think that this invites more abuse, and probably more innocent people will be affected by it, while the real crazy, the person that does do the mass shooting, nobody suspects until they open fire. Because that's usually the case with almost all those people. For 20/20 hindsight, everybody knows they were a little bit off, right? But there's probably 1,000 people that are a little bit off, like they are, that never do it. And you can't predict which one's going to do it. That's the other aspect of it. But so what I would suggest on this, and this just kind of hit me the other day, is that if you're going to do this, and I'm not for it, but if you're going to do it, then there needs to be some kind of pretty strong provisions to really restrict how it's implemented. Now, the best case would be obviously that the person be informed, given a court notice, and allowed to defend themselves before the order is given. But of course, that would defeat the entire purpose, because that would presumably trigger the person if they really were crazy, right? So that won't work. So it occurred to me, well, what we need to do is have a process where there has to be like an advocate. Like years ago when my mother, who was declining into dementia, I had to get guardianship. Somebody came by from appointed by the court. I presume this was a lawyer, I can't recall, or some kind of a professional, that basically, checked out the situation and saw what kind of conditions my mother was going to be taken care of in, and tried to talk to her and everything else. In this case, you probably won't directly talk to the person, but what I'm saying is an investigator for the court would go out and become an advocate for the person they're going to red flag, and then present that along with the case for the person that's advocating them being red flagged, so that at least there's a judicial process being carried out to give the person some degree of due process. Okay. Second of all, if the thing does go forward, obviously, I think, and if they do have to go to court, and if they ultimately prevail, the government should totally cover their legal expenses. They should also cover any property damages done during the seizure, any medical expenses that are incurred if the person's injured, and maybe something for psychological damage. And I think what I'm suggesting here is that perhaps for people in Congress that are opposing this, rather than simply saying no, maybe they should just try to add these kind of provisions into the bill to make it so, unworkable, as it will collapse on its own merit. And if it does pass, at least there'll be some significant safeguards that aren't in many of the current provisions that are out there. Because I do think that this is all part of a process to legitimize gun confiscation on a bigger and bigger scale. And the other thing that I would all like to throw in this too is the idea of some kind of procedure for restoration of gun rights. After all, let's face it, everything is going in the direction of taking away people's rights and prohibiting people. And so, you'll have a situation sometimes where somebody maybe at the age of 19 got into some kind of event which in some state law is a misdemeanor, which is punishable by more than a year in prison. That's all it takes, or some kind of domestic thing many years ago with a person they're never involved with anymore, and it's a lifetime ban. And the question is that fair? Also, what about somebody that's guilty of something which is a completely nonviolent offense? Let's say a False Statement Act violation on a form or something like that. Should that lead to a lifetime ban of owning a firearm? It seems to me like there ought to be some modification of those rules in the direction of people's constitutional rights if they're no longer likely to pose a threat or never did pose a threat. This idea that we're going to go after people who have never committed a crime and ban them, well, what about people that aren't really violent? See, so I think we need to just restore some equity to this process if we're going to do it. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to kind of rampage through some of my thoughts on this. For the moment, I suppose everybody on the Second Amendment side needs to contract their members of Congress and really oppose what's going on here. Obviously, some of these things are going to have to be litigated in court, and we have no idea how they're ultimately going to turn out. I think there's been some wins and losses on some of these things, and in the past have already occurred, and we'll just have to hang in there. But anyway, I just thought I'd kind of run through that for everybody because it's kind of a hot topic at the moment. So I'll close this for now.